What's up, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Fantasy Holics podcast. My name is Jordan Jaika, and I'm here with my co-hosts Rydawg and Zach, who I do not have a cool nickname for yet. And we are in the middle of our team mini-series for Major League Baseball, and this is going to be the sixth installment, and we are talking about the Milwaukee Brewers today and their wonderful lineup and rotation. So I'm going to hop right into it, and we're going to start right off with their lineup. Leading off, and we were just talking about this before we started recording, and they have Eric Sogard playing third and leading off. When you look at ADPs, not really any fantasy relevance. He's really not being drafted, which seems fairly appropriate to me. So, Zach, I'll kick this over to you. Is there any other candidates to play third this year, or who would you like to see leading off here?
Well, I'm not a fan of Sogard. He's just not it. There's just nothing to really pinpoint. I would personally sadly, he's probably the best option at third base. I mean, Jerko's the other candidate, but no. I would preferably like to see Kane lead off again this year. I know he had a down year last year, but he's feeling good. He's feeling healthy. He's ready. He's motivated. That would be my top option. Lead off.
Okay. And I mean, I'll move right over to Kane because I don't really think there's many thoughts on Sogard, and he right now is projected to be batting behind Sogard, batting second in the lineup. Obviously, in the outfield, he's a great defensive outfielder. He's currently being picked at 160, about pick 160, and so I'll kick it over to Rydawg. What do you like Kane this year? Do you think 160 is a good value for him? Are you targeting him at all?
I mean, I think for a bounce back year for Kane is definitely within reach. I would take him as my utility fourth outfield guy if he's on the board.
What about you, Zach?
I think that's appropriate. I mean, especially if you're in a four outfield league, I think he, as a fourth outfielder, I could see him. I don't know if he quite gets up to above 300, but I could see him hitting 290. He'll have decent pop. He might hit around 20 home runs. He'll steal some bases. He's a good value at around that range.
Yeah, my only problem with him, I think that, in my opinion anyway, he has limited upside. I mean, maybe he's going in that position because of the steal potential, and I think in today's game, it's hard to find guys that consistently steal bases. But yeah, I was looking at his numbers. He's 33 now. His offensive game has slowly regressed over the past few years. I personally, whenever I get to, you're looking at round 14, 15, 16, that's where I like to start targeting guys with some upside. And the worst that's going to happen is that I'm going to drop him. So he's not a guy personally for me, just because I think his upside's limited. But if you're looking for steals in that round, it's probably about right for him.
Now, one more thing I would like to add about Lorenzo Cain is the fact that while you see his numbers have gone down, his hard contact rate is actually last year was like the third highest in his career. So I don't think he's really losing anything on his swing, perhaps.
Yeah.
So that's the thing he has going for him.
Yeah, no, that's a fair point. And then we'll hop into probably clearly the most fantasy relevant guy batting third in the lineup will be Christian Yelich. He's on average on Yahoo going third. I think that's fair for him. I personally have him third in my rankings. The major reason for that being, I mean, he did steal 30 bases last year, and anytime you have a guy that can hit 40 home runs and 30 steals, that's a win-win for me. And I mean, I would almost say, and this is probably going a little outside the box, but his numbers from a fantasy perspective, I think maybe more valuable than Mike Trout. And I know a lot of people will say that's kind of controversial, but Mike Trout doesn't really steal the bases that he once did. He's more of a 15 steal guy. So if you're getting equivalent power, Yelich bats around the same average, a little more. He scores runs. I think he's really close to Mike Trout, but I have him third. What about, I'll start off with Rydawg this time. Where do you have Yelich in your rankings?
I have him in the top 5. I mean, you have your Acunas, your Trouts, your Sotos, Betts, Bellinger, whoever. You really can't go wrong with either one of those guys in the top 5. The first round is in my opinion, as deep as it will ever get right now in today's fantasy baseball world. So if you're looking for steals and home runs, you're going to go Yelich just because he does all 5. Even if you want more home runs, you might want to go Bellinger or Acuna maybe.
Mm-hmm.
It just depends what you're targeting first. That's just my opinion. I mean, top 5, top 3 for Yelich, definitely. Fair value.
And what about you, Zach? You got any thoughts on Yelich? Anything to add?
Not much. I actually have him at number 2, right behind Acuna, just because of a lot of the reasons you guys mentioned. He's a complete player. He hits the home runs, he steals bases, he hits for a high average. He has a good on base percentage. He does it all for more so than any of the other top guys, in my opinion. That's why I would slide him right in at number 2.
Yeah, no, and I agree with you. That's why I mentioned, I think Mike Trout is obviously the big name, and everybody always picks him second, but I don't think I'd judge someone if they took Yelich second. Batting right behind him is second baseman Hyora right now. He's going around pick 54 right now, which is kind of right in that range of Albies from the Braves, a little behind him. And I'll start off with you, Zach, on this one. What's your thoughts on him? Are you taking him around that pick?
I see a little bit of a regression for him. I still think he's easily a top 5, top 6 second baseman, simply because the position is weak, and you don't got a lot of guys that you can count on. You got Albies, you got VR, obviously. So with he's gonna strike out a ton. He has some power. His power numbers will probably increase. But I expect his batting average to go down. I expect several other stats to go down, but I wouldn't be upset with somebody if they took him around that in the late 50s. But for me, he's more of for me, he's more in like a 70 ADP range, simply because I think he's in for a decent sized regression.
Okay. What about you, Rydawg?
I like him a lot this year. I could see some regression just because of the limited games he played last year. But, I mean, 19 home runs in 84 games? So,
84 games, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's just impressive. I mean, just imagine what he would do in a full season.
Mm-hmm.
Zach's right. The second base position's limited. So, I mean, I would take him right after all these. The 54th overall spot, that's definitely somewhere where I would aim for Harua if he's there.
Yeah, no, and I agree with that. And I personally like to try to grab a second baseman in that range, just because once the top 5 or 6 guys are gone, the drop-off is so significant. I mean, you're really throwing a dart at that point. And I think the advantage that you get here is, we say regression. So he was on pace for almost 40 home runs last year. So let's say at the second base position he hits 30 home runs or high 20s, 90 RBIs. Maybe he's not going to hit 300, but he hits 270 instead. So even a little bit of regression, he's still an elite second baseman offensively. And I think I'd have him ranked right in that range. I think I had him 56, so I have him right in that range, and I think that's fair for him. Bottom half of their lineup going down. Now we're to Justin Smoak, who is going to be playing first for him. He's going pick 243 currently. He's batting behind some guys that should be able to score some runs, so he will have the opportunity to drive in some runs. But I'll start off with you again, Zach. Any thoughts on Smoak or the first base position?
I mean, just because of his spot in the lineup, he probably will. He'll drive in. Obviously, like you said, he'll drive in some runs, but he's a huge. He also has to stay healthy. I think if he can stay healthy, which is a big question mark with Smoak, if he can stay healthy, he can be really good. But yeah, his late ADP, I would take a chance on him simply because the potential is there with that spot in the lineup.
Mm-hmm. What about you, Rydawg? Any thoughts on him?
I mean, if you're going to 200 plus picks. I mean, if you have those deep roster spots, I mean, go for it. I wouldn't trust him as my starting first baseman, that's for sure. Maybe depth, just like Zach said, because of his spot in the lineup and who he's hitting behind. But other than that, I mean, his upside has kind of reached during his time in Toronto. So I think where he's at in his career.
Yeah, no, and I'd agree. I'd leave him most likely on the waiver wire. The thing that concerns me the most is, he doesn't have a ton of pop for a first baseman, considering the injuries that he's had. And his average, when he has been healthy, has been floating around 220, 230, and that really doesn't get me excited for my first baseman, especially if I'm getting 220, 230, you better be hitting 40-plus home runs guaranteed, and I personally don't see that for him. If he hits 40 home runs, good for him. I will personally apologize, and I'll kiss his feet, but I don't think that's happening. Then number 6, who I've seen a few places say this is a trendier sleeper, is Avisal Garcia playing in the outfield for him. He's going at pick 245, which is kind of interesting to me. It's after Smoik, which is, I guess that is what it is. I guess I don't really understand that, but I'll kick it over to Rydawg first this time. Any thoughts on Garcia this year?
I mean, I do like Garcia a lot. He showed really a lot of promise during his times with the White Sox. I think a big issue for him was always injury, and he always missed like 2 months of time a year. But he's always had like decent numbers. But if he had a full season, he could have been a really, really good ball player offensively. But I would definitely take him as a bench spot just because he's got the potential to. I could see him taking over the 5th spot behind Smoke as well, but I mean, the 6th spot just doesn't really do it for me in that lineup, so I would take him as a bench spot.
Yeah, what about you, Zach?
I loved the signing. I think the thing that's scaring people right now is the fact that Council has came out and said him and Braun will platoon and right. Mm-hmm. And then you will have Garcia will spell Kane when he needs a day off. Mm-hmm. So I think the big issue with Garcia is the playing time. Like he's not he'll be a near everyday player, but he won't be an everyday player. So I think that's the big thing. That's what has people really devaluing Garcia right now. But at that ADP, I expect him with Braun's gonna miss 80 games probably if it was a full season. Kane's gonna need his off days, and Council said that Garcia might be the best defensive outfielder on the team, so he'll spell Kane in. I expect him to probably play. If it was a full season, I would say he'd probably play 140, 145 games, but I could see why the ADP is down a little bit.
Yeah, no, he's a guy that I've taken in the last few rounds a few times just because he has some great power potential. If he does get those consistent at-bats, he was a big prospect coming up, and when he's healthy, he's shown big ability, and I'll take a chance on a guy like that in the last few rounds, and I've mentioned it a few times, but the worst thing that's going to happen is you end up dropping him, and it's really no skin off of your back, but he's a guy that I think has some potential, and I like taking a late-round flyer on him. 7th in their lineup is going to be Omar Narvaez, catching for him. He's going as one of the last catchers drafted currently, 230. I'll start with you, Zach, this time. Any thoughts on I guess not only him, but the catcher position in general? What's your philosophy? Ryan and I talked about this in a previous episode, but what's your philosophy when it comes to catchers? Do you like to try to grab Real Muto? Do you wait on one? Talk a little bit about that.
I personally, Narvaez is actually, I like him this year, similar to the situation with Garcia. You have Manny Pena there also, who I think is the Brewers like defensively. Narvaez is a not good defensive catcher, to be kind. So I think that's going to really take away some of his starts he could potentially have. But if you're looking for I'm one of the few people that believe in carrying 2 catchers on the roster, simply because you cover off days and whatnot. And I don't have to use an ad when my catcher has an off day or something.
Mm-hmm.
So I personally, I don't really necessarily feel like I need to go like Romuto or Sanchez. I think you can find value. There's other guys. There's catching positions. There's a couple at the top, but then after that, like, it's all grouped together. So I feel if you grab 2 of those not top guys, I mean, with the catching position, you should be okay.
Yeah. Any thoughts from you, Rydawg, on catching position as far as?
I mean, I would rather take I've said it in a previous episode before. I mean, there's just guys that I would rather take in the the late 90s, the 100s, the guys like the Will Smiths, the Contreras, the even Wilson Ramos. I mean, this is just he's too behind in the lineup where I wouldn't really want him as my everyday catcher for fantasy baseball. I mean, maybe as a backup catcher, just because he seems like he has his role secured. But outside of that, I mean, I'm not starting him for any of my teams.
Yeah, no, and I think catcher is a tough position because so many of the teams in Major League Baseball now, they really have platoons for their catching positions, and that's why I personally like trying to get a catcher early. It doesn't always work out every draft, but I think if you have one of those top tier catchers, and I've said this before, but no matter what team you're playing that week, you have an advantage right off the bat in that position versus position, you have a better guy that's going to put up better numbers. Now, if I can't get one of those guys, I usually end up just streaming a guy trying to play the hot hand a little bit. But catcher is a tough position just because it's very unpredictable year to year. Back end of their lineup, in a few notes on bench guys. I don't think much to talk about. Orlando Arcia is going to be playing short for me. He actually had a really strong spring before they canceled the games. Ryan Braun off the bench, who Zach already mentioned, and then Luis Urias. All those guys. Arcia is not really being drafted right now. But Braun and Urias have actually gone around the same number as Garcia, around 40 or so. But I don't really have many thoughts on those back end guys, so I'll kick it over to the Brewers fan, Zach, over here. Any thoughts on their bench, back half of the lineup, anything to look out for there?
I think the situation with Arcia and Urias could be something to watch. I mean, Arcia had a strong spring, but he's had some stronger springs before, and he hasn't. Every year, you wait for Arcia to finally have a breakthrough, and it hasn't happened.
Yep.
And he's not young. I think he's like 27 or 28. Like he's not young anymore. So I don't expect him to remain the shortstop for that long, because I think he's gonna cool off. His spring's gonna wear off. And I think the Brewers love Urias, so I think given like a month into the season, I expect to make the change there. And as for Ryan Braun, I think I can see taking like a late round flyer on him simply because he's gonna get his fair share of playing time, assuming he doesn't get hurt 3rd game in. But other than that, like, those are the only 2 guys that I would consider taking at all.
Okay. Ryan, any thoughts on that, or are you kind of in the same boat where it's kind of irrelevant to you?
I mean, if there was coaching changes made, like if Braun end up being the first baseman, like I would think, over a guy like Justin Smock, but that is not the case here.
Yeah.
So in that situation, as of now, I guess I would not really look much into it.
When you said coaching change, I thought you meant Ryan Braun was going to retire and become a coach. I think he's about at that age.
Very possible. I mean, it would make more sense if you had Braun play first, since he did have some time at first base last year. you give him his everyday role. You give Garcia more playing time, more at bats. Talent-wise, guys like Braun and Garcia should be on the field way more than someone like Justin Smock. I mean, that's just my 2 cents.
Yeah, no, for sure. So that wraps up the lineup portion of it. We will hop into their rotation. Starting it off right at the top, we have Brandon Woodruff. He's going around pick 92. And I'm going to start with Rydawg only for one reason, because he's going around the same pick as Mike Soroka. So I want to hear what your thoughts are on Brandon Woodruff here.
I mean, he gets his strikeouts. I like Woodruff. There's nothing against him. I think he's a great pitcher. But I would take Soroka over Woodruff in this situation just because.
You don't like strikeouts? Is that why?
I like pitch control.
All right, fair enough. I just wanted to throw that in there.
I like low ERAs.
Yeah, Soroka's ERA will definitely be lower than Woodruff's. I haven't seen him pitch too many times. Obviously, the K rate's pretty good. But, Zach, what are your thoughts about – I want to talk specifically a little bit about him going 92 overall. Is that too high? Is that fair?
I honestly think that I would take him a little bit – I would take him a round or two earlier. So because I see him as easily top 10 starter potential. I mean, he was – If he didn't get that injury last year, he probably would have finished close to the top 10 overall if he doesn't sustain that kind of injury last year. So his K rate is amazing. And as we're gonna find out, the rest of the rotation is not good. So I
think that's putting it politely.
We just covered the rest of the rotation.
Yeah, I would probably put him at an ADP, probably around like 80, 85. I would take him like a round earlier than Justin.
Yeah, no, and I think that's reasonable, because I think he's a guy that has upside, but he's also not guaranteed to have a big season either, just because he does have some risk with the injury history. I think he only pitched about 120 innings, I want to say, last year. I think he had 145 strikeouts or so good numbers. But, he's probably a guy, if he was able to pitch 170 innings, he might touch 200 strikeouts, a mid-3 ERA. So I think the upside's there, and I think that ADP kind of shows, okay, he has upside, but at the same time, I'm not 100% sold on him.
I mean, he has more strikeouts last year than Soroka did, so.
Probably in Soroka's career, including the minor leagues. Oh, God. The rest of their rotation, I'll just kind of go through 2 through 5 here. Adrian Hauser right now is listed as their second, Brett Anderson third, Josh Lindblom as their fourth, and Eric Lauer as their fifth. The only guy that's even has an ADP on ESPN or Yahoo is Adrian Hauser, their number 2. Looking a little bit into it, he being drafted around pick 240. So once again, really depending on the size of the league, either undrafted or going as one of the last picks. He had a decent K rate from what I saw. Some of his advanced analytics showed he was, an average pitcher with a decent K rate. So I'm not necessarily – the biggest thing, too, is none of these guys are going to get a ton of wins. I don't expect the Brewers to be a powerhouse exactly. So that's the biggest thing with their rotation. But I'll kick it over to you, Zach. Any notes on any of their 2 through 5 guys? Anyone in the minors maybe that's going to make an impact? Or is this kind of what you see is what you get?
Our farm system isn't good. It's not a good situation. We've gutted it the last few years to try to be competitive. I think it started with the VR trade. That's where it kind of started, and then it just kind of. But Adrian Hauser could be a potential sleeper to watch. I mean, he had a decent year last year, and the Brewers seem to really like him. The thing with him is that he was kind of like a reliever converted into a starter, so his innings kind of aren't. He's not like a he doesn't go 6 innings very often, so that kind of caps his upside a little bit. But he's a guy I would like if you're trying to throw a dart in like the last round or two for a starter. He's a guy that I would consider. I mean, there's probably a bunch of names on that list, but he's a guy I would definitely consider late as a flyer.
Yeah, and I'm assuming the back end of the rotation, from what I've seen, I mean, really no fantasy relevance at all, and I mean, really not any upside. And
No.
speaking to their minor league system too a little bit, it's definitely weak, as you mentioned earlier. And not only that, the guys that they do have are a few years away from being called up. When I was looking at a lot of the ETAs of their top prospects, it's still, 2 years away for a lot of them. So it's a weak system. No one really on the cusp of making the major league roster. So it's going to be interesting for them the next few years. They're one of those organizations that seem like they might be going through. I mean, obviously they're rebuilding, but if they don't have a strong minor league system, it's going to be really hard for them to build anything. So I'm interested to see. If I was Yelich, I'd get a little frustrated here.
Yelich took a pay cut too, didn't he?
Yeah, a little bit.
Yeah. I mean, they're all streaming options in my opinion, outside of Woodruff. I mean, I've used Anderson a lot last year for streaming options. He did somewhat decent. I didn't use too much of Hauser. Outside of that, I mean, you just know what you're getting out of Woodruff as opposed to the rest of the rotation. Not much fancy relevancy there.
Right. And kind of finishing up on the pitching side of things, we'll talk about Hader. He's currently going pick 50, about a little under 50, 49. Which seems, I mean, of course, he's one of the most dominant bullpen arms in the game, but man, does that seem really high to me for a closer? So, I mean, I don't usually ever take a guy that high, pick in the top 50, but I'll start off with Rydawg this time. What are your thoughts on taking a closer that early, and I mean, specifically Hader as well?
Well, this has a two-parter to it. I would never take a closer this early, ever. Yeah, no. I see people taking them, but that's like the last thing on my mind as a closer, as opposed to me finding my second outfielder or my starting first baseman. Mm-hmm. Even though he is a Maryland boy, I just wanted to put that out there. He's just not that. I'm not taking him round 5 or round 6. No way.
What about for you, Zach? Any thoughts on the closer situation, or just taking a closer that early in general?
Basically the same with Ryan. Just not. I mean, there's no reason to take a closer. I know Hader's. He's dominant. He's might be arguably the best reliever in the game, but there's just no reason at that point that you're taking him over. You're taking him over a guy like VR. It's just doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I always mention whenever we talk about bullpen arms or closers that make sure you pay attention to your league scoring, because it makes a big difference depending on if it's just saves or if it's saves and holds. Because if it's saves and holds, I mean, that just diminishes his value even further. So always, just keep an eye out on what the scoring is. I feel like a lot of commissioners slide that in without you even noticing. You're like, hey, wait a second. And, that affects value a ton, though.
Oh, great. And that's just the icing on the cake. Even if it was just saves, I'm still not looking for a closer there. And then saves holds, I mean, yeah, you can forget it. You can get guys like, we talked about, we can get Lugo, we can get Hudson, whoever, so much later, and they put that much more, there's not much more value to it.
Right.
Because it's just a position.
And like that, it's been mentioned, the Brewers won't be that great this year. So you got the factor of, especially if it's just a saves league, I don't see Hader getting a ton of chances. And another thing to watch with Hader is that he struggles a lot of times if he pitching back-to-back days.
Mm-hmm.
So that's something to watch if he's a full-time closer. Is that if they need him back-to-back days, there's going to be a few blown saves in there.
For sure. And the last thing that we'll talk about, and I actually don't have any notes on this, but I'll kick it over to Zach to see if you have any thoughts. Usually we end on naming a few impact prospects that might make their major league debut this year. I really didn't see anyone in the Brewers system that I thought was going to be relevant, so I'll let you talk a little bit about just the state of their farm system and any thoughts or comments on that.
Yeah, this year I don't really see nobody's gonna make it up this year from the minors. I just don't see it. It might be the worst farm system in baseball simply because they don't have a single guy that's gonna really has a chance of making it this year. There would have to be like 3 or 4 injuries to one position in order for somebody to even have a remote chance. Bryce Terrain is probably our best prospect, but even him, I don't see him making it up till like maybe late next year at the earliest. He has a lot of potential. He's just not close to ready yet, and that's saying a lot. Being is that he's our best prospect.
Yeah, I would say so. So how many wins do you have them? If it was a full season, because it's hard to really predict, but if we were going to play a full season this year, which we're not, but if we were, how many wins do you have them with this year?
I would give them probably around 75, 76. And a lot of projections have them at like in the 80 to 82 range, which just isn't going to happen.
I was testing your bias a little bit.
It makes sense. I mean, I'm very obviously I want to be wrong, but being a realist, I don't see much more than 75 wins. Just the rotation's just awful. And if Woodruff struggles at all, we are going to be like the Orioles level.
Right. Yeah, I mean, in my opinion, I legitimately think they could be the worst team in the league potentially. I'm not saying they will be, but I think they could be because I look a lot at rotations, and I think pitching is the foundation of any good championship roster. And, I mean, they might have the worst rotation in the league. I mean, at least they're in the conversation. So, I mean, I have them probably 70 optimistically, but I wouldn't be surprised if they were in the 60s.
I mean, still got the Orioles. They don't really have anybody.
Yeah, the Orioles you have to put in there too.
The least they're better than the Orioles.
I mean, I guess if that's our goal to have a better record than the Orioles, then I mean you got to start somewhere. But any other closing thoughts, Rydawg, Zach? Any other thoughts on the Brewers?
I mean, yeah, I see them as a 65, 70 win team. I mean, they're down there with the Orioles, the Tigers, the Marlins. You know, I don't see any of those teams. Maybe the Brewers are one of those few that reach 70, 75. Like you said, Jordan, pitching's the foundation of it. I mean, at least the Brewers have a guy that has promise to show full ace potential. I mean, the other teams don't really. So.
I will say, I do think they will finish ahead of the Pirates.
Yeah,
I do think the Pirates will be worse. Only because the Pirates literally have, like, no one on their team. Like, other than... No, really, I can't really name anybody that is going to be that relevant this year. So,
yeah.
They'll finish ahead of the Pirates, but not by much.
You got to start somewhere, though. So I think that's all that we have today. So thanks, everybody, for watching. This is our 6th installment of our MLB mini-series. We'll have others coming out this week. If you don't follow us already, make sure you like us on Facebook at Fantasyholics. Our Twitter is at Fantasyholics1. And make sure you subscribe to us on YouTube. So, Zach, Rydawg, thanks for hopping on with me, and we'll see you guys next time.
Later.
Late.